In House of the Dragon, it picks up in the 9th year of King Viserys Targaryen's reign. This is 172 years before the death of the Mad King and the birth of his daughter, who ends up being Daenerys. King Viserys ended up becoming king because King Jaehaerys' sons both died. It resulted in Jaehaerys calling a great council where he would choose an heir to his throne. It came down to two choices: Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, who was the king's eldest descendant, and then her younger cousin, who was Prince Viserys. He was the king's eldest male descendant. Viserys ended up getting it because of that fact. He's a male. Now, he sits in King's Landing, reigning over the Seven Kingdoms with his wife and his daughter Rhaenyra. And his wife is pregnant, who he hopes is with a son. Rhaenyra has dreams of being a knight who rides in a battle, but she keeps being reminded about the fact that her battlefield is going to be giving birth. Rhaenyra ends up coming back from a recent trip where she flies around with one of her dragons, and she has to go attend to her father's meeting. In this meeting, a guy named Lord Corlys, who is married to Rhaenys, warns Viserys of a growing alliance among the free cities. They're calling themselves the Triarchy. They're led by a guy named Kragas Drahar. He calls himself the Crab Feeder, due to his inventive methods of punishing enemies. Even though Corlys urges Viserys to not take this guy lightly, it seems like he's going to take him lightly. The other issue is there's somebody missing from this meeting. It's Viserys' brother, Daemon. Daemon is now in charge of the City Watch, which is kind of a police task force. The Crown has put a lot of money into retraining and re-equipping. They thought they would get an update on the progress of the City Watch, but Daemon's nowhere to be found, and it doesn't really seem like Viserys cares too much. The king is more concerned with the tournament that he's holding. He's holding it in the honor of his unborn child, who, once again, he is convinced will be his heir. But it turns out Daemon isn't far from this meeting at all. He's actually sitting on the throne. Rhaenyra is the one who finds him, and he tells her that he heard her father was hosting a tournament in his honor. Because the way he looks at it, if the queen has another daughter, then he is the rightful heir to the throne. And he's pretty convinced that it will be a daughter, which means that this whole tournament is for him. But he actually brought Rhaenyra a gift. It's a necklace made of Valyrian steel. Rhaenyra then has to go and do her studies. She does so with her best friend, Alicent Hightower, whose father's pretty high up on the board. But instead of talking about the lesson that day, they start talking about how Rhaenyra feels about this whole situation. That her father is acting like she doesn't exist. Like the be-all, end-all is this unborn child, and the fact that everything is hinging on him being a boy. To Alicent's surprise, Rhaenyra wants her father to get his son. As long as she can recall, it's all that he ever wanted. The person she's worried for is her mother, because her mother will be blamed if this baby comes out and it doesn't have a Y chromosome. While Rhaenyra is discussing the matter with Alicent, her father is actually getting some medical treatment. He's got a nasty wound on his back, and they don't quite know what it is. They've sent inquiries to the Citadel, but they haven't heard back. Her dad doesn't think it's a big deal. He thinks it's just a cut from the Iron Throne. But it looks nasty. Whatever it is, though, it's refusing to heal. The latest treatment's probably going to end up being cauterization. After meeting with the doctors and the maesters, he heads to go check on his wife, who is in the bath. The pregnancy's been pretty brutal for her so far. She jokes that she wouldn't be surprised if she hatched an actual dragon. After they get off that conversation, she asks, "Have you heard from your brother?" And he says, "No, not since I've named him the commander of the City Watch. But, you know he'll turn up during the tournament. He always does." But just because Viserys hasn't heard from Daemon doesn't mean Daemon isn't taking this job lightly. In fact, he's busy that night, where he, along with the rest of the City Watch, barge into King's Landing and tear it up. They do so in the name of thievery. He tries to rid the city of criminals while simultaneously gaining respect from the entire town. But he does so in pretty vicious fashion. I'm talking castrations, limbs being chopped off. It's a pretty public showing. They needed a 2-horse cart just to haul away the dismemberments. And Otto Hightower, who seems to be the king's second in command and is Alicent's father, gives the king the update on what happened the previous night once the king wakes up. And you can tell by his tone that Otto thinks that Daemon went way too far with this. He warns the king Daemon cannot act with this kind of unchecked impunity. But as he's saying this, they're walking into the room where Daemon is sitting, so he overhears all of it. It forces a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation with Otto telling Daemon, the City Watch is not to do your bidding. It's an extension of the crown. It starts a disagreement with Daemon saying that he was enforcing the crown's laws and Otto thinking that he went too far. Daemon feeling like he was just trying to clean up the streets before this tournament kicks off, with a bunch of people coming from all over the place to take part in it and also watch it. Lord Corlys throws his 2 cents into the ring, telling the group that they put Daemon in that role because they thought he could do it, and criminals should fear the City Watch. But somehow Otto spins this into Daemon's relationship. Turns out he's kind of a deadbeat husband. His wife is stuck in Vale, and Daemon hasn't been there in quite a while. Daemon, however, seems to be in a loveless marriage, and he tells Otto, "I know your wife just died, so if you want mine, you can have her." But Otto takes great offense to that, which you can kind of understand why. That line even results in the king telling Daemon to chill out a little bit. He figures that his brother's just trying to provoke Otto. The king then turns to Daemon and tells him, "You can enforce my laws, but what happened last night cannot happen again." The next day, the tournament kicks off. The king announces to everybody that his wife has gone into labor, which is great. Should only be a matter of hours before they find out that the king finally has an heir. And just like King Viserys predicted, his brother does in fact show up for the tournament, and he's really good. I mean, Daemon is slaughtering the competition, but he does have some competition, and that of a knight that no one's really familiar with. His name is Criston Cole, and other than the fact he's really good at the games, nobody knows anything. But he definitely has caught the eye of Princess Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, along with Alicent, though, spent most of the games gossiping. But after another victory from Daemon, he asked for the favor, which is really the support, from Alicent. And the eyes that Daemon is giving his daughter does not sit well with Otto Hightower, but there's nothing really he can do. I mean, giving support is really just throwing a bouquet down. The games continue until finally it's Daemon versus Sir Cole. They start off jousting, and Cole gets the best of Daemon. That leads to an all-out sword fight, where once again, Cole gets the best of Daemon. But instead of killing him, which is pretty much what has happened to everybody else, Cole respects Daemon and makes him yield, which Daemon's not happy about, but it's better than death. When he's all done, Cole comes over and gets Princess Rhaenyra's bouquet of support. But unfortunately for the king, he missed all of this. Viserys was called into the chambers of his wife, who is really having difficulty with the labor. The baby's in breach and it's stuck. Viserys is given the tough task of sacrificing his wife for the hope that the baby can live. He does that because, as he's told, they both are going to end up dying if you don't do this. So unfortunately, he says goodbye to his wife, they cut the baby out, and the good news is Viserys finally gets his heir. It is indeed a boy. The bad news is the baby dies a few hours afterwards. A couple days later, everybody gets together for the funeral. Daemon walks over to Rhaenyra and tells her, "Your father needs you now more than ever." And she says to him, "You know, I wonder if in the few hours that my brother was alive, my father was finally happy." Just like her father, she's mourning too, but it's the loss of her mother. She then walks up to the dragon that she has and commands him to set fire ablaze to the body. After the funeral, the king gets together with his council and they have to discuss the fact that he once again doesn't have an heir. And it's really important that he does have an heir, or at least announces one, just for the stability of the realm. He's getting up there in age, and people want to know who they're going to follow. And Corlys brings up the fact that they already know who the heir is. It's going to be Daemon Targaryen. Some people agree with Corlys. Some people are completely opposed to this because they think that Daemon is a tyrant who will be a disaster as king. And the biggest proponent of this is Otto, who points out that you need to look no further than what he did with the 2,000-strong army that we gave him. He pillaged this city. The truth is, Daemon should be far away from here. One of the maesters suggests that they need to come up with a solution because something might happen to the king, and he shoots back, "What do you think's going to happen? My brother's going to murder me for the crown?" Daemon has ambition, but not for the throne. He doesn't have the patience for it. And Otto tells the king, "The gods have yet to make a man that lacks the patience for absolute power." So if it's not Daemon, then the only other option is Rhaenyra. But that's never been done before. Doesn't mean it can't be, but it's just never happened. There's been a precedent that it's always been a man. But as Otto sees it, he'd rather have Rhaenyra as the future than Daemon anywhere near the crown. Corlys brings up the fact that his wife, Rhaenys, should have probably gotten the crown. And also, she has a son, so she already has a built-in heir. But nobody's listening to Corlys on that. It finally gets to a breaking point where the king freaks out. He's grieving, and he doesn't want to listen to any of this anymore, so he walks out. But he was unaware of the fact that his brother listened to the whole conversation. He heard what Otto said about him, and he also heard what Viserys said about him. When the council adjourns, Otto meets up with Alicent and asks how's Rhaenyra doing, and she gives him the update that she's in a pretty tough spot. He then tells his daughter to go visit the king in his chambers, because right now he needs a visitor. And it definitely seems like Otto is offering his daughter up as a sexual distraction. But she does it. She goes to his chambers, and it doesn't seem like anything happens. It really just seems like she does keep the king company. The next day, though, the king gets a report from Otto that really troubles him. Otto has learned that previous night, Daemon, along with certain officers from the city watch, took over a brothel. And at that brothel, Daemon made a speech where he toasted to the heir for a day. And from the report that Otto got, this was a celebration, not mourning. It enrages Viserys so much that he calls his brother to his throne, and he's no longer talking to his brother. He's talking to a subject. He demands to know if the reports are true, and Daemon says, well, yeah, they are, but we all grieve in our different ways. The king feels completely betrayed by this. He yells at his brother, you have no allies in court but me. I've only ever defended you. And this is how you repay me? But Daemon yells back, you've only ever tried to send me away, whether it be to the Vale or the City Watch. Anywhere but by your side is where you want me. 10 years you've been king and you've never once asked me to be your hand. Daemon then tells the king that he feels like his current hand, who is Otto Hightower, is playing him. He doesn't protect the king. And when the king asks, from what? Daemon says, from yourself. You're weak. And that council of leeches, they know it. They'll prey on you for their own end. This is tough for the king to hear. So then he gives his brother something that's tough to hear. He tells his brother, you're not going to be my heir. You are to return to Runestone and your wife at once. Daemon doesn't have a choice, so he does. But the heir to the throne is going to be Princess Rhaenyra. But before they go through the ceremony where she's officially named the heir, he has to tell her a story that's been passed down for every king. King Aegon had a dream where he foresaw the end of the world for men. What he's describing eventually becomes the Battle of Winterfell. She doesn't quite understand it, but she listens to all of it. She then gets sworn in, and people come from all over to pledge their loyalty to her. We're talking Baratheons, Starks, and as Rhaenyra is getting sworn in, her uncle is returning home at the king's orders. Episode 2 picks up 6 months after the death of the queen and the announcement that Rhaenyra will be the heir. In this time, Daemon has set up shop on Dragonstone. He's taken it over, and he's brought his army with him. Other than that, though, no one's really heard from him. As King Viserys is going through court, he gets barged in on by Lord Corlys, who is pissed off. He's now lost 4 ships to the crab feeder, and he wants Viserys to do something about it. Otto tells him that he will be reimbursed, but he doesn't want reimbursement because this is just going to continue. And if the shipping lanes close, then he's going to be really screwed. What he asks the king to do is go to the Stepstones, where the crab feeder is located, and beat him out by force. But Viserys tells him, I'm not prepared right now to start a war with the free cities. And one of the maesters turns to Corlys and reminds him that in 7 kingdoms, no one's ever opened war with the free cities. The losses would be too great. And Corlys asks, well, then why would the crab feeder even fear us? No one really has an answer to that. Eventually, Viserys tells Corlys, I have acted. I've sent envoys to Pentos and Volantis to see if we could find common cause. Ships and men are at the ready, and the Stepstones will be settled in time. And then, out of nowhere, Rhaenyra, who is over in the corner, says, you have dragon riders. You can send us. Corlys loves that idea. But the king doesn't. He tells Rhaenyra it's not that simple. And then she finds herself getting kicked out of this meeting. Mainly at the behest of Otto. She's tasked with going to find a replacement for the Kingsguard. One of the members died, and they have to replace him. Sir Harold Westerling, who seems to be in charge of the Kingsguard, takes Rhaenyra out and shows her the candidates, but she's not impressed with any of them. She finally asks, do any of them have combat experience? And only one does. And it just happens to be Sir Criston Cole. The fact that he has combat experience and the fact that he's not the worst looking guy in the realm gets him the job. Although, when Otto hears Rhaenyra so quickly say, then it's settled, Criston Cole will be joining the Kingsguard, he tells her to pump the brakes a little bit. Some of the other candidates have more of a relationship with the crown. They're important allies, but she doesn't care about any of that. All she cares about is the fact that Criston Cole will actually be able to keep her father safe. But in the 6 months since she's lost her mother, Rhaenyra really hasn't talked to her father all that much. Her father, meanwhile, has continued to talk to Alicent. Alicent has been stopping by every day and just listening to the king, all his problems. And he asks Alicent for advice on what he should do about his daughter, and Alicent tells him that these things take time. When she lost her own mother, she didn't really feel like opening up. But she does suggest that maybe he go to her, not wait for her to come to him. Right after talking with the king, Alicent goes and meets up with Rhaenyra. They head down to pray for their lost mothers, but Rhaenyra starts venting to Alicent about the fact that it hasn't even been a year and already the people around her father are trying to marry him off so that they can replace her as heir. And it's not like she feels any loyalty to her dad, because the way she looks at it, her dad didn't choose her. It was more about spurning Daemon. They then sit down and pray for their moms. But as they were praying, the king was having a meeting with Lord Corlys and the queen that never was, Rhaenys. The king explains to Corlys that as king, it's his obligation to avoid war. And Corlys gives him the cold reality of what the outside world might view right now. They view a king who is weak. The queen is dead. A girl has been named the heir to the Iron Throne for the first time ever. The king's brother has been disinherited and in turn claimed the Targaryen seat on Dragonstone unopposed. And now a foreign power has established a colony in the most important shipping lane. Fact is, right now the crown is vulnerable, or at least it's perceived to be vulnerable. So what Corlys suggests to change all this is joining the families and having Viserys marry their 12-year-old daughter who looks more like she's 9. Now on paper, Corlys' daughter Laena is a perfect match. This would unite the two surviving Valyrian houses, and it would allow him to show the realm that the crown's strongest days are ahead of him. The downside of this is she's 12 years old. That doesn't really seem appealing to the king. But he also knows that it's expected of him to take a wife eventually, to continue to try to produce more heirs, strengthen his line, all that. So he agrees to meet with Laena the next day. He then has to go for medical treatment, because he got a nick on his finger from the Iron Throne, and now that's festering. So as he has a bunch of maggots try to clean his wound off, he asks a small group what they think about this marriage to Laena. That small group includes Otto and one of the maesters. Otto brings up the fact that she's incredibly young, which the king already knows. The maester, however, says that a match with Laena would go a long way towards signaling unity throughout the realm. When the king brings up the fact that he's worried about what Rhaenyra might think, the maester says, what does it matter? Her mother's passed and you're expected to remarry. Otto, though, tells Viserys that he doesn't envy him, because he knows what it's like to lose a wife. And to be forced to remarry and replace her because of duty, that's gotta suck. But the next day, as agreed upon, Viserys goes and he meets with Laena. And this is gonna surprise you, but they don't really have a lot in common. All she wants to talk about is this lost dragon that they can't seem to find. And Viserys does his best to give her an update on where they think this dragon might be. But as they walk the grounds and Laena tells Viserys what her father told her to regurgitate, her mother, Rhaenys, and his daughter, Rhaenyra, are watching it, and they're both pretty disgusted. They end up having a conversation about how none of this really sits well with them, but they don't have a choice. It's just the way that it is. Rhaenys tries to give Rhaenyra some advice. After what happened with her, she feels like it's her duty. She doesn't want to get Rhaenyra's hopes too high that she will eventually be queen one day, because the reality is her dad is going to remarry. He is going to have kids, and the odds are one of those kids will be a son, and when that happens, she's going to be pushed aside, just like what happened to her way back when. Rhaenyra, however, takes it as jealousy, because Rhaenyra is getting the chance that Rhaenys never got. But Rhaenys tells her, look, the hard truth is, these guys are never going to let a woman command the realm. Just not going to happen. Later in the day, Viserys gets together with arguably his most trusted advisor, Alicent. He starts telling her about the predicament that he finds himself in, and she does her best to just listen, like she's been doing for the last 6 months at the behest of her father. And in that 6 months, she's made a lot of headway. While it doesn't seem like anything physical's taken place, the king has really taken a liking to her. He finds Alicent extremely easy to talk to. But as he's having a conversation with her, her father, Otto, comes in, and he tells her that he's convened a small council for an emergency session. The king has to come to it immediately. So the king gets up to attend this session, where he's told that his brother, Daemon, has stolen a dragon egg. The dragon keeper then hands over a note that was left by Daemon. In the note, it says that Daemon is remarrying to a woman named Lady Mysaria. She's also pregnant, and as is customary, a dragon egg will be placed in the baby's cradle. Daemon is getting married in 2 days, and he has invited the king. But it doesn't seem to be a real invitation. The king doesn't really care about it until he finds out that that dragon egg was the one that was sitting in his baby's cradle. The same baby that died. Viserys gets up and he wants vengeance, but Otto stops him and says, "You shouldn't go. Let me handle this." So he agrees to it. He's going to send Otto along with an army. Otto gets ready to leave and he goes to say goodbye to Alicent. He does notice, though, that she has some self-mutilation habits. She picks at her fingers constantly. He might be concerned about the fact that the king might not be into bloody fingers, because right before he leaves, he asks Alicent, "Are you going to see the king tonight?" And she says, "Yeah, if you want me to." And he absolutely does. He then heads off to Dragonstone, and he is greeted by Daemon, and who is to be Daemon's new wife. He doesn't know her, but Otto starts calling her things like a whore, and then telling him that he has to get off of Dragonstone, abandon it completely, get rid of his army, and give back the dragon egg. This turns into a complete pissing contest between the two men, one that even Sir Criston gets involved with. But eventually this pissing contest almost results in the two groups fighting. They pull out their swords and they're ready to go to battle until Otto and his group notice that Daemon has a full-on dragon ready to attack. They can't compete with that. That is until Rhaenyra flies in on her dragon. She, however, doesn't want to get into a fight. She just wants to talk. She parks her dragon and walks up to her uncle, and she tells him that he has to go. He's pissed off the king. And when Daemon says, "I'm not sure how, I'm just getting married," she points out, "You already have a wife." To which Daemon says, "Yeah, but not by my choosing." She then gets down to what she feels is the real root of Daemon's problem. He's jealous. So she tells him, "I'm right in front of you. Go ahead, kill me. If you kill me, you're the heir to the throne." But Daemon isn't about to kill Rhaenyra, throwing the dragon egg at her and walking off. With the dragon egg safely in their custody, Rhaenyra, Otto, and the group go back to King's Landing. But the thing is, Daemon and Lady Mysaria aren't getting married, and she's not with child. Daemon lied in that report, and it really pisses off Mysaria. She tells him, "You can afford to play these stupid games with the king, but I can't. I didn't come here for gold or power. I came here to be liberated from fear." So now his wife doesn't like him, and neither does his mistress. Back on King's Landing, though, the group hasn't arrived yet when the king needs somebody else's thoughts on this whole marriage situation. So he goes to one of his trusted advisors, a guy named Lord Lionel. He asks Lionel's feelings on the situation, and Lionel realizes just how young Corlys' daughter is, but he also realizes that Corlys is going to be pissed off if the king doesn't marry his daughter. And the relationship between House Targaryen and House Velaryon could be incredible. It's one nobody would really want to trifle with. So his advice is to marry her. After all, Corlys makes for a better ally than an enemy. He then gets word, though, that his daughter has arrived back from Dragonstone, and this is the first time he is hearing that Rhaenyra went there, and he is livid. He didn't want her going into that dangerous situation. He starts yelling at her for acting out, but as she puts it, "I didn't think Sir Otto could get the dragon egg back on his own." He understands and he actually agrees with it, but what it comes down to is he can't afford to lose her, not after what happened to his wife. And that's when he finally gets to have an honest-to-God chat with his daughter about the grieving process. They both open up to each other, and it's much needed. He then brings up, though, the fact that he's going to have to marry again. He's not trying to replace her as heir, but the line is pretty vulnerable, and he has to replenish it. While she doesn't seem to be happy about the fact that he's marrying, she tells him, "You're the king, and your first duty is to the realm." But she probably figured that he was going to marry Corlys' daughter. And when he calls the council, he says, "I am going to marry, but it is to Alicent." It's a surprise to most of the room. A huge relief to Otto, who has been planning this for a while. And just as Lord Lionel had predicted, Corlys is pissed. But he's not the only one. Rhaenyra walks out, because it doesn't seem like she was planning for her father to marry her best friend. She had no idea the two even talked. She, however, just went to her room. Corlys went to go visit with Daemon. He calls Daemon to his house on Driftmark, and he starts pitching him on how they could work together. Corlys still has this problem with the Stepstones and the Crab Feeder. He knows that the Crab Feeder is backed by powerful people in the free cities who want to see Westeros weaken. The king doing nothing about any of this has allowed the Crab Feeder to accumulate strength. It's only a matter of time before the shipping lanes fall, and Corlys' house will be crippled. So if Daemon were to do something about the crab feeder, it would prove his worth to anybody who doubts it. And what Corlys is selling, Daemon appears to be buying. In episode 3, Daemon got right to work. He started attacking the crab feeder, and he, along with Corlys, started a war in the Stepstones. But 3 years later, they're still fighting that war. Every time they attack with a dragon, the crab feeder and his men just go into caves, and dragons can't really do anything about it. They're slowly losing the war. But that's what's going on in the Stepstones. Over with King Viserys, things are going great. He and Alicent have had their first child, and it's a boy. His name is Aegon. Alicent is also pregnant with their second child. And as they celebrate the baby's second birthday and get ready for a giant hunt, he gets an update on how bad things are going for his brother and the sea snake, who is Corlys, in the Stepstones, but he's not really concerned about it. He just wants to celebrate his son's birthday. Someone, however, is missing. The heir to the throne, Rhaenyra. Alicent figures that she has an idea of where Rhaenyra is, and sure enough, Rhaenyra is outside just reading. She has no interest in being a part of this party. The relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent, along with her father, has been strayed ever since he announced that he was going to be married to Alicent. Now that her father has had a boy, it doesn't get any better. She's slowly waiting for the announcement that she has been usurped as heir to the throne. He finally got the boy that he always wanted, so in her mind, it's only a matter of time. Because of that, she's pretty miserable. Alicent, meanwhile, has tried to be a friend to her, but to no avail. She does, however, have to pull rank and force Rhaenyra to come along to the hunt, and she's able to do so because now she is technically the queen. On the way, though, to the hunt, the king brings up the fact that Rhaenyra is of age. She has to get married. But she's just not interested in that. And even though her father reminds her that it is her duty, she still is not interested in it. They arrive at the location of the great hunt. The king, Aegon, his wife, Rhaenyra, they all get a standing ovation as the carriage comes in. And really, this hunt is in honor of Aegon, who people have already decided is going to be the heir to the throne. Just like Rhaenyra, they figure it's only a matter of time before the king announces it. The one person who isn't so sure, though, is Otto. He thinks the king is going to be pretty hard-headed with this, so he knows he's going to have to worm his way in and try to convince the king that naming Aegon the heir to the throne is the right move. Whether he thinks it's the right move for the kingdom or just his own family is yet to be determined, probably a little bit of both. But the family gets settled, and they head into a giant tent where a big party is being held. Most of the women, however, in this party are discussing what's going on in the Stepstones and the war with the free cities. Recently, somebody named Lady Joanna was abducted, and she's going to be sold into the free cities, so the women are kind of gossiping about that. But they're also wondering what the king plans on doing about it. When they ask Rhaenyra her feelings on it, she reminds them that the kingdom isn't at war. And they look at her and say, yeah, we are. Your uncle forced our way into this war. So far, it's kind of like the United States in World War II. They claim to be neutral, but everybody knew that they were a part of the Allies. Many of the people, however, just want the king to send some aid and clear out this triarchy for good. But so far, the king is reluctant to do any of that. Rhaenyra gets tired of the conversation. She heads out of the tent, and she meets a familiar name. It's a Lannister, but it's Jason Lannister. And just like with most Lannisters, he is very arrogant, very cocky, and it turns Rhaenyra off pretty quickly, especially when he brings up the fact that he has the resources to build a dragon pit. And she's a little confused, and he says, well, I could do it for my queen or my wife. Rhaenyra quickly realizes that this whole conversation was set up by her father in an effort to get her to marry this guy. She ends the conversation pretty quickly and storms back into the tent to confront her father about this. It results in a pretty loud public argument between the two where he yells at Rhaenyra that it is her duty to marry. It gets so bad that Otto has to jump in and settle the two down before this public affair gets any more public and more embarrassing for the crown. Rhaenyra gets so annoyed that she leaves the tent, hops on a horse, and takes off. Luckily for her, Sir Criston Cole saw her leave, so he hops on a horse and chases after her. When he's finally able to catch up to her, she starts venting about what just happened to her, the whole Jason Lannister situation. After she's done venting, Criston says, we should probably head back to camp, but she doesn't want to do that. She'd rather just travel around the woods and post up there for a little bit. So that's what they do, just wandering and talking. The king, though, gets word that the hunt is going well. There's been a sighting of a White Hart. It's a big, giant albino stag. And a Whiteheart is looked at as the king of the King's Woods. Otto tries to make the case that this is a sign from the gods. Aegon's birthday, you find the king of the King's Woods. Can't be a coincidence, right? But Viserys doesn't put too much stock into it yet. He's still a little bit flustered about the conversation he just had with his daughter. The hunters continue to search for the white stag, and that night, the king starts to drink. A lot. Jason Lannister comes up to him while he sits on his throne, and he presents him with a special spear that he had made for Aegon in his birthday. He hopes that Viserys will use it to kill the Whiteheart. He then makes his pitch to Viserys about why he should be able to marry Rhaenyra. And one of the reasons he brings up is the fact that he will make a really good home for her and be a sort of consolation prize for not getting the throne. But this really pisses Viserys off. The fact that it's just assumed that Aegon will usurp his daughter, who we already named to be the heir. He sets Jason straight right away. Rhaenyra will continue to be the heir, despite the fact that he has recently had a son. And this decision wasn't made on a whim. Jason Lannister just leaves, and then Otto comes up. He gives him an update on the Whiteheart, and then he reminds Viserys that Rhaenyra is not only his daughter, but he is the king, and she will do as he commands. But he's not interested in commanding her to marry somebody. That's not what he came for. He wants his daughter to be happy. So Otto proposes something that he thinks Viserys might be more comfortable with. Incest. That's right. He proposes that Rhaenyra marry Prince Aegon. I mean, he is only her half-brother after all. King kind of looks at Otto like he's nuts. Not because of the whole incest part, but because Aegon just turned 2 years old. Otto points out, though, that if the king were to do this, it would cease the endless proposals for Rhaenyra that the king's been besieged with. The king, though, laughs it off and reminds Otto, I came here to hunt, not to deal with this crap. The king is clearly getting tired of it. But that wine is some good. And the king continues to drink, forgetting about his problems. So when Lord Lionel comes up to him, the king is pretty drunk. Lord Lionel, though, comes up to him and gives him an update on where Rhaenyra is. The king starts beating himself up over the fact that he can't even command his own daughter, and Lionel reminds him of a previous king who held peace throughout the realm but was driven crazy by his daughter, so don't be too hard on yourself. He then asks the king, do you want my opinion on this? And the king really doesn't, but Lionel's going to give it to him anyway. He tells the king that the person that Rhaenyra should marry is the son of Rhaenys and Corlys, Sir Laenor. He gives him the exact same reason on why he thought that the king should have married Laenor's sister 3 years ago. But Laenor is currently fighting in the Stepstones, so he has to survive that first. The king doesn't really say anything. He just gets up and leaves. He goes and stands outside staring at the fire when Alicent comes up. And he tells Alicent that this whole Rhaenyra issue is really eating at him. The fact is, he named Rhaenyra the heir to the throne because he accepted the fact he was never going to have a son. He had a dream that he would have a son, and he feels like it drove him to try, which resulted in the death of his first wife. He never thought he would remarry, and yet here he is, with a new wife and a new son. He thought by naming Rhaenyra the heir to the crown, it would stop all of that. But then everything changed. So now he's wondering, what if he was wrong about naming Rhaenyra the heir? And just like she's done for the past 3 years, Alicent doesn't give much insight, she just listens. The next morning, though, they get an update on the white stag. They've caught it, or at least they thought. When the king arrives to kill the stag, turns out it's not the Whiteheart. It is a giant stag, but it's just not the one that they were searching for. Doesn't matter, though. It's got to die. So Jason hands over the spear, the king goes up, and he kills it. But Viserys wasn't the only Targaryen to get a kill. Viserys and company head back to camp, and they're eating when all of a sudden the alarms go off. Not the alarms for a kill or the alarms for attack, but the bad bitch alarms. Because Rhaenyra returns with Criston, and there is a wild boar being dragged on a cart behind them. The previous night, they were attacked. Criston injured it, and Rhaenyra ended up bludgeoning it. So when she returns to camp, she is covered in blood, and all eyes are on her. But she doesn't say a word. She just walks right by the king and into her tent. The next day, everybody returns back to King's Landing. Before she goes to bed, Otto goes to visit his daughter. All efforts to try to get Viserys to, quote, see the light and name Aegon the heir to the throne haven't worked so far. So he's got to go through his daughter to get this done. He starts pitching Alicent on the fact that this is the right move, not only for the realm, but for her. She should want her son to be king. But she reminds her father, everybody vowed their loyalty to Rhaenyra, including us. He tells her, though, that that's all well and good, but that was before Aegon showed up. And no one is ever going to follow a woman. It's just not going to happen. The realm would be in shambles if Rhaenyra took the throne over Aegon. He instructs her to guide Viserys towards this reasoning. So that night, she goes and visits her husband, who is very hungover. They start off the conversation about Rhaenyra and how she has to marry. Alicent's advice, though, is that Rhaenyra has to believe it's her choice to marry. She can't be forced into it. She's too hard-headed. She then notices that there's a letter to the king on the table, and it's from Vaemon Velaryon. He's Lord Corlys's brother. He's begging for help. The king, though, doesn't want to send aid. He looks at this war as it started by two malcontents who were unhappy with the decisions that he made. So what message would it send if he bailed them out? But she poses the question, is it better for the realm if the crab feeder thrives or is vanquished? And deep down, Viserys knows that the answer is vanquished. So the next morning, he gives the aid that Vaemon had asked for. He gives a letter to a soldier and says, this is for Daemon and Daemon's eyes only. And the letter just says, hey, I know it's been a little while. I know we've had our differences, but I don't want to see you perish in this battle. So I'm giving you the aid to win this war. And every day I'll pray for your safety. As he's handing off the letter, Rhaenyra comes into the room, and he gives her an update on what the letter said, why he's sending it. And then they get into their issues. She finally comes clean on the fact that she, along with just about everybody else, is waiting for the announcement that Aegon is going to be king. That's one of the reasons why all this marriage talk has really turned her off. She feels like she's being used as a pawn, something that can get the kingdom something in return. They start arguing about how that is literally how it's done. You marry for advantage. With Rhaenyra screaming, well, if it was for advantage, you would have married Laena Velaryon, but you didn't. And that's a point that the king can't even argue with. The king then takes his wife's advice, telling Rhaenyra, you're good to marry, but you can do it on your terms. Go out and find somebody you're comfortable with. It puts Rhaenyra's mind at ease right away. But as she's leaving, he gives her some more good news. He admits that he wavered on the issue of the heir to the throne after Aegon was born. But he swears on her mother that she is the heir to the Iron Throne. Now, over at the Stepstones, things are not going well. Corlys, Daemon, and that group are losing this war. It's so bad that Vaemond is kind of hinting at a mutiny against Daemon. Laenor Velaryon actually does have a plan, though. He proposes that somebody go down to the caves and bait the crab feeder along with his army to coming out of it. But Vaemond brings up that nobody is crazy enough to do that, and Laenor brings up, well, Daemon is. Daemon returns at the tail end of this conversation. That's when Viserys' man comes up and gives him the note. Instead of being relieved, though, Daemon is infuriated, so much so that he beats the crap out of the messenger. He's not going to let his brother bail him out. So even though it's crazy, he enacts Laenor's plan. He plays straight up hero ball, going down to the cave and waving a white flag. Just as he's about to sacrifice himself, he starts attacking, though. He starts running through arrows, killing a bunch of the crab feeder's men until finally he is hit. I mean, it took a while. These are the worst archers in the land. They straight up suck. But right as the crab feeder's men have Daemon surrounded, that's when Laenor flies in with the dragon and starts attacking everybody. The dragon, along with the gold cloaks and the sea snake's men, they finally win the war. Daemon heads into the cave and kills the crab feeder, bringing his body out and having him live up to the name because he feeds the crab feeder's body to crabs. He does all of this before Viserys' men can even arrive. In episode 4, Rhaenyra travels away to host a bunch of guys that have called for her hand in marriage. It's basically a medieval bachelor. The problem is she's not handing out any roses. None of the guys really do it for her. They're either too old or too young. She finally gets up and calls it, leaving early. This after a 9-year-old seemed to have killed a guy who insulted him. In fairness to the 9-year-old, the guy was being a dick. As she's traveling back to King's Landing, all of a sudden a dragon comes out of the sky, and she recognizes it. It's Daemon's dragon. And Daemon's dragon is heading for King's Landing as well. So that means that she won't be the only person arriving back. Daemon, who is finally returning to King's Landing after 4 years, walks back in wearing a crown. Viserys asks him, "Why do you come in here wearing a crown?" And Daemon explains that after he defeated the Crab Feeder, the Triarchy named him the King of the Sea. But he realizes that there's only one true king, and the Stepstones now belong back to the realm. He then bends the knee, sign of respect to Viserys, who finally welcomes his brother back. They then have a mini welcome back party, and you could tell that Viserys is just happy to have his brother back. It completely overshadows Rhaenyra coming back, who, by returning early, likely embarrassed her father. But now with Daemon back, her father doesn't even care. But Rhaenyra is still very much upset by it. She goes and sits down by herself, and she's joined by Alicent. Rhaenyra starts whining about the lack of suitors she had, and how none of them actually want her. They just want her name, her power, and her ability to bear children. And while Rhaenyra is whining about this, she's completely oblivious to the fact that Alicent really didn't have that luxury to pick her own mate. Instead, Alicent has to have sex with Rhaenyra's father, who isn't looking great these days. Alicent, though, does tell Rhaenyra, "I'm glad you're back. Lately, I haven't had many friends. I still look at myself as Lady Alicent, but everybody else looks at me as the queen. So it's good to have a friendly face." And Rhaenyra looks at her friend and says, "I missed you too." So it's not just Daemon and his brother who are building bridges. Eventually, Rhaenyra is able to get her uncle alone. She asks him, "Okay, what are you doing here?" And he tells her that he just missed home. But she doesn't believe that. She knows there's some ulterior motive with Daemon. It's also clear, though, that he's not telling her what it is. They then get into her current situation with her trying to be married off. And just like with Alicent, she starts whining about her predicament. Well, that's when Daemon explains that marriage is just a political arrangement. And after you do get married, you could do whoever you want. Rhaenyra, though, is a little bit skeptical about this. Once the party ends, they finish up their night with Rhaenyra heading to her father's council. Now with the Stepstones freed up, they start talking about what exactly is going to happen with them. And it seems that even though it's been 4 years, Lord Corlys is still upset about the fact that his daughter was passed up for Alicent. Otto then brings up the fact that Corlys is planning on marrying his daughter off to the son of a person known as the Sea Lord. The Sea Lord is a part of the Free Cities, so if this were to happen, House Velaryon is entering into a pact with the Free Cities. This would likely mean that the Crown would have to seek their own marriage pact. And with Rhaenyra sitting right there, she knows what they're talking about. Rhaenyra doesn't say a word at the council meeting, though. And afterwards, she heads off to her bed, says goodnight to Sir Criston Cole, who is manning the door outside. And she has plans on just going to bed, but then she notices that there's a bag full of clothes that she doesn't recognize. And inside that bag, there is a map. The map looks like a map of her bedroom, so she goes and follows and finds out that there is a hidden tunnel from her bedroom leading to outside the gate. She puts on all those dirty clothes and follows the tunnel, and there's Daemon waiting for her. And with this disguise, she not only doesn't look like the princess, she looks like a boy. Daemon then decides to take her around and show her a King's Landing that she's never seen before. A King's Landing at night. They start off with a little bit of a play where she finds out just how unliked the idea of a woman being a ruler is. The performance all has to do with her being named heir to the throne, and she's not really well received. But Daemon didn't convince her out to watch a play. He leads her off to a brothel, and they watch an orgy. All those naked people rubbing up on each other. Rhaenyra gets all kinds of horned up. And that is when she kisses her uncle. He not only kisses her back, he rips off the hat that was concealing her hair. He pulls her pants down. I mean, it looks like they're about to do this thing, and Rhaenyra is fully willing. But then out of nowhere, Daemon pulls back, leaving the brothel. Rhaenyra can't figure out exactly what's going on, and she goes to chase after him, but she can't find him. And eventually she gets so upset that she returns to the castle, walking right through the front door, which is quite a surprise to Criston Cole, who never saw her leave, so he's very confused. But we're talking a horned-up 19-year-old. You got to let that tension out. So instead of explaining herself to Criston, she invites him in her chambers And she decides that if she can't have her uncle, this night will do. She loses her virginity, and it seems to be the best 2 minutes of her life. And while it's never explained, it certainly doesn't seem like Kristen would really care that he was the second choice. But while she's having consensual sex and enjoying it, her best friend is down the hall being forced to have sex with her father. Because very, very late at night, Lady Alicent was called to the king's chambers, and she just has to lay there and take it. And she's miserable. Now, even though Rhaenyra went out with a disguise, when Daemon pulled her hat off, she was seen by one of Otto Hightower's spies. And the next morning, that spy finds Otto Hightower and tells him exactly what he saw. With no other choice, Otto has to bring it to the king. But instead of believing Otto, the king is in complete denial. Otto doesn't feel real comfortable explaining the full severity of the situation. He tries to pussyfoot around it. But even then, the king is in denial that his brother and his daughter were hooking up the previous night at a brothel. He starts questioning the source, and Otto tells him, "This source has never proved me wrong." This whole conversation is being overheard by Alicent, who, unlike the men, wants to get to the bottom of it and isn't willing to pussyfoot around. She calls for a private meeting with Rhaenyra, and she comes right out with it. "What did you do last night?" At first, Rhaenyra says nothing, but when Alicent explains that her father brought the king some pretty bad rumors this morning regarding her and her uncle, the truth starts to come out, although not fully. Rhaenyra never once admits to hooking up with her uncle, even going so far as to say Daemon never touched her, which, isn't true at all. Even with her story having a ton of holes in it, Alicent chooses to believe her friend. But even though the king doesn't believe it, the allegation is so bad that he has to talk to his brother. He sends his guards to go find Daemon, who is extremely hungover, and he has a private one-on-one where he asks his brother, "What did you do?" And unlike Rhaenyra, Daemon owns up to it, saying, "She's of age, and if she's going to lose it to anybody, it might as well be me." And as you can imagine, the king does not take it well when his brother says that about his daughter. The king yells at Daemon, "Great, now my daughter is sullied. Who's going to touch her?" And Daemon says, "I will. Marry Rhaenyra to me. This is what our family does. Keeps the tradition alive, and it keeps our bloodline strong." But the king is completely disgusted. This was clearly Daemon's plan all along, to sully Rhaenyra's name and leave the king with really no choice but to marry his daughter off to his brother. He would leverage this to finally get to the crown. Instead of giving in, though, Viserys says, "Go back to the Vale and to the wife that you actually married. Try to restore any scrap of honor that remains. I don't want to see you." The king then returns to his room and he starts talking to Alicent. And Alicent believes her friend. She tells the king, Rhaenyra's never been one to lie, but Daemon, he's never been one to tell the truth. And Viserys asks her, what does he have to gain by lying about this? The fact is, whatever happened, Rhaenyra isn't innocent. So a little while later, he calls a meeting with Rhaenyra. He starts off the meeting by showing her a very familiar dagger. It used to belong to Aegon the Conqueror, who, it's worth mentioning, had multiple wives. But this dagger has been passed down in the family to the next king. When you heat it up, it has a secret inscription. It says, "In my blood comes the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire." He shows her this and explains that just by knowing about this dagger, that's a way bigger burden than being on the throne. And it's also a way bigger burden than her desires. She right away takes offense to the fact that he hasn't even asked for her side of the story, but he says, "Rhaenyra, it doesn't matter. It's all about perception. And I should disinherit you, but I'm not. You will wed Sir Laenor Velaryon, who in reality is way better looking than her uncle. And even though she probably should be happy about this arrangement, she's not. She yells at her father, "You're going to marry me off so I can be your remedy for your political headaches?" But he yells back, "You are my political headache. This wedding will unite the two most powerful houses in the realm. With this wedding, nobody will want to stand against us." And that's when Rhaenyra questions him on that, asking, "What about the vulture perched on your throne?" Viserys has no idea what she's talking about, and she explains, "Otto Hightower. He's had an agenda this whole time. And that agenda is to get Aegon to the throne, not her." At first, Viserys is in denial about this. He thinks it's crazy. Otto Hightower has served 3 kings now. But the more she talks, the more she kind of makes sense. And once Viserys has more time to think about it, he realizes that his daughter is onto something. Late that night, he calls a meeting with Otto. One thing that he can't get over is the fact of Otto's fast rise in the kingdom. In 5 days, he went from just being a guy on the king's council to being the second most powerful guy on the throne, serving over a king and then another king, and helping Viserys become the king that he is. But it was when Viserys realized that he was played by Otto and the pawn in the game was Alicent, that's what clinched it for him. In the most difficult time in his life, it was Alicent who helped him get over the death of his wife. And Viserys realizes now that Otto was the hand that moved that pawn there. Otto tries to save face and salvage his name, but doesn't work. Viserys rips the pin off his jacket, and Otto Hightower is no longer the hand of the king. Before he can go to bed, though, there is one final thing that the king has to do. He has one of his maesters cook up a remedy for his daughter. It's basically medieval plan B, because there is no way that if his daughter is going to marry somebody, she's going to do so knocked up. In episode 5, Rhaenyra and the king head off to go meet with Lord Corlys and his wife and propose the marriage. But as they're sailing off, Otto Hightower is kicking rocks. He's leaving King's Landing. Right before he does so, though, his daughter runs out and starts apologizing for how all of this transpired. But instead of being understanding, he puts all of the blame on her, saying that she trusted Rhaenyra instead of backing him. The trust in Rhaenyra ended up leading to him getting fired. She, however, throws it back on him, saying, no, what got you fired was the fact that you're so desperate to get Aegon to be the heir to the throne. And that's when he tells her that nobody is ever going to follow Rhaenyra. She should prepare Aegon, who's, by the way, all of about 3 years old, to be king. Because once the king does die, and he will die, he's not going to live to be old, he's constantly sick. But once that happens, nobody's actually going to live up to this oath that they swore to Rhaenyra. And Otto's not wrong. The king is always constantly sick. Hell, even on this trip, while everybody else is fine, he gets seasick. But everybody arrives safely, including the new king's hand, Lord Lionel. When they arrive, though, Lord Corlys is not there to greet them, which is taken as a pretty big slight. Lionel starts to make a pretty big stink about it. And while Corlys' children, Laenor and Laena, who is much more grown up than the last time we saw her, try to make excuses for their father, Lord Lionel continues to make a big deal about it until finally the king says, who cares? Let's just get on with this. So the children then bring the king to their father. And the initial greeting between Lord Corlys and Rhaenys is a pretty friendly one. You would think that they're old friends. Corlys ends up telling the king, sorry we couldn't meet on better circumstances, and the king has no idea what he's talking about. And that's when Corlys tells him that Daemon's wife passed away suddenly. It was a hunting accident. She was thrown from her horse and her skull and her neck were crushed. That's the story that everybody got. The reality was Daemon returned to the Vale, saw his wife. His wife started insulting him because, man, they really didn't get along. And Daemon ended up scaring the horse to throw his wife off and then bludgeoning her to death. Of course, nobody knows this. Hell, the king didn't even know that she died in the first place. In fact, he thinks it's weird, but he isn't there for that. He brings up the marriage. Lord Corlys and the king start negotiating. And after a little while, it's settled that all of the kids that are born from this marriage will come out with the last name Velaryon. But if they take up the throne, they will do so with the last name Targaryen. This way, the Targaryen name doesn't die on the throne. While the two men were discussing the terms of this marriage, the two children who were supposed to be married, Laenor and Rhaenyra, walk on the sand. They're very familiar with each other. They grew up with each other, but they don't really want to marry each other for various reasons. For Laenor, the main reason why he doesn't want to marry Rhaenyra is the fact that he's gay, and she knows it. And she doesn't want to marry Laenor because he's gay, and she knows it. So they come to an understanding. They will go through this marriage. They will bear children, but they'll also be free to sample other fruit from the market, if you will. There's really only one person that isn't a fan of this proposed marriage. It's Rhaenys. She gets Corlys alone and she approaches him about all her concerns that she has. The first is the fact that she is pushing her gay son into a relationship that he's not going to be happy in. And Corlys' response to that is he'll outgrow it. But her main concern is actually a concern that Otto has. Yes, everybody swore an oath to Rhaenyra, but that was before Aegon came around. And once the king dies, is anybody really going to follow that oath? She feels like the answer is probably not. People will challenge for the throne, and when they do so, they'll come not only for Rhaenyra, but her husband and her children as well. They're just not putting their son in a safe situation. Corlys, though, looks at it like she's being a little ridiculous. The two powerful houses connected. Nobody's going to want to touch that. The next day, the Targaryens sail back to King's Landing, and as they're on the ship, Sir Criston Cole approaches Rhaenyra. He's been thinking about the night they had together for a long, long time, and he ends up proposing to her. He wants her to run off, ignore the crown, and marry him. He makes his best pitch to her, but doesn't really go all that well. She has no interest in abandoning the crown. She likes their current setup, friends with benefits. And it's not like he's so much in love with Rhaenyra, it has more to do with the oath that he made, an oath of chastity joining the King's Guard. He broke it when he slept with Rhaenyra. He figured that he could convince himself it was okay if they were married, but now that she's basically telling him that he's nothing more than a boy toy, it doesn't sit well with him. She tries to explain that this whole situation has way more to do with the crown. It's bigger than the both of them. But try telling a man who just broke his chastity oath that. As soon as they arrive back at King's Landing, he is summoned. He thinks it's by Rhaenyra, but it's not. It's by the Queen. While everybody was away, the Queen had been approached by Larys. He is Lord Lionel's son. He's disabled. He's got a really bad foot, which means he can't really do much other than walk around and listen, gossip. At first, they talk about the unfortunate situation that led to his father becoming the Hand. But that leads him to planting a seed in the Queen's mind. He brings up how Rhaenyra is sick. The reason he says that is because one of the maesters brought her a certain kind of tea. It puts the seed of doubt into her. She starts panicking, wondering if she made the wrong move by trusting Rhaenyra, because if she did, it single-handedly led to her father being ousted. So she has to get to the bottom of it. She has to talk to the one man who was standing outside of Rhaenyra's bedroom that night. She sits Criston Cole down, starts explaining why he's there, and it seems like what she's leading to is, did Daemon enter the room? But she doesn't even get that far, because Criston just owns up to it. Yep, it was me. I slept with Rhaenyra. My bad. I made a chastity vow, but there that goes. He begs for forgiveness from the Queen, and actually goes so far as to say, please don't torture me. Give me a merciful death. But she is so in shock, while also simultaneously feeling a little betrayed, that she just lets Criston go. Meanwhile, down the hall, her husband looks like he's on death's door. As soon as he returned from King's Landing, the king fainted. I mean, he looks horrible. So much so that he starts talking to his new hand about what kind of king he'll be remembered as. And Lionel tries to be a good friend by saying, you've got plenty of time, but it doesn't look that way. Although the next day, when they start the celebration of this marriage, the king does look much better, which is great news. They're going to have a miniature feast where all of the big families from around the realm show up, and then in a week's time, the marriage will go down. One of the people who shows up for the marriage is Gerald Royce, who is Daemon's former cousin-in-law. He was really close to Daemon's wife, and it's pretty clear he is still mourning the loss of her. But as everybody is coming up to greet the king and Rhaenyra, one person who is noticeably missing from the table is Alicent. She hasn't really talked to anybody since she found out the truth between Criston and Rhaenyra. However, the king covers it up by saying she's just getting ready for the party. A short while later, though, everybody arrives and sits down, including Daemon. That was a surprise. Nobody really expected him to show up. But once everybody is seated, the king starts making a toast. He doesn't get very far into it when the door opens up and Alicent walks through, interrupting it. She's dressed in a beautiful green dress, but where she comes from, Old Town, the color green symbolizes get ready for war. The fact that she interrupted the speech was absolutely planned. She is not happy. And while the king is surprised, the king isn't willing to make a scene about it. Once Alicent sits down, the king continues his speech saying how important this day is, how great it is to unite the two families. And after the small feast that they have today, they will have 7 days of tournaments and other feasts, and by the end of it, there will be a royal wedding. Shortly after the party actually starts, Alicent's uncle walks up to her and lets her know that all of Old Town supports her. He knows that she's going through a difficult time with Otto being ousted from King's Landing. She's all alone. Now she's showing up in a green dress. It's not lost on them. And while Alicent was talking to family, Gerald Royce approached Daemon. He's not happy. He tells him that where he comes from, men should have to pay for their crimes. But Daemon knows that there's nothing that Royce can do. It's not like he has any proof. And he actually tells him, you know what, Gerald, I'm actually happy you showed up. because me and my wife didn't have any heirs, which means that anything that she was owed comes to me. And she was owned a place called Runestone, which means that Daemon now has claim to it. He tells Gerald, as soon as this wedding is over, I plan to go and claim it. And Gerald was not expecting that. The party continues, though. Everybody seems to be having a good time. But one person who is in attendance is Joffrey, Laenor's boyfriend. And after Laenor explained to Joffrey the terms of he and Rhaenyra's agreement, Joffrey made mention that she must have somebody in mind. So he spent most of the party trying to figure out if that person was in attendance. And that's when he saw the way that Criston was looking at Rhaenyra. He pulls Laenor aside and tells him, it's that guy. And Laenor doesn't really care, but the point that Joffrey makes to him is, if she knows your secrets, it's important that you know hers. A short while later, Joffrey goes up and introduces himself to Criston, who has absolutely no time for him whatsoever. He's in a bad mood, and he's working. But Joffrey starts making mention that they both have a vested interest in this marriage. And basically, that he and Laenor know that there's something going on with Criston and Rhaenyra. And now that everybody knows everybody's secret, it's important that everybody look out for each other and just keep their mouths shut. But the real guy that Joffrey should probably have kept his eye on is Daemon, who walks up to Rhaenyra on a very crowded dance floor and confronts her about the decision she's making to marry Laenor. She ends up repeating a lot of what Daemon had first told her about marriage. The fact that it's political, the fact that it really doesn't matter, and the fact mainly that she doesn't have a choice. She goes so far as to challenge him to take her. She's not married yet. Grab her, kidnap her, and make her his wife. This conversation, though, gets interrupted when there's a scream. And that's because turns out Criston did not enjoy the conversation he had with Joffrey, and he ends up beating the hell out of him. I'm talking about caving the guy's skull in. It really ruins the party atmosphere. As soon as Criston is done, he heads out to the garden. He can't live with the fact that he broke his chastity vow. So he gets ready to commit suicide. But he's stopped by Alicent, who won't let him do it. And the wedding, that gets sped up. Laenor certainly isn't in the right mindset. He's in complete shock over the fact that the love of his life just died. Rhaenyra really isn't into it. And luckily, they don't even get the I do's out before the king collapses. Possibly for the final time. In episode 6, we get a 10-year time jump. Rhaenyra and Laenor have had 3 sons. Jace, the oldest, Lucerys, and Joffrey, their baby. And as soon as Joffrey is delivered, Rhaenyra gets word that the queen wants to see him. Rhaenyra is so turned off by the fact that she can't even spend time with her newly born baby that she gets up, having just delivered him, and walks him to the queen, bloody and all. She presents the baby to the queen and the king. The king is over the moon. And when the queen asks what the baby's name is, Laenor blurts out, it's Joffrey, not even consulting Rhaenyra, which pisses her off. But there's one thing about baby Joffrey that everybody notices. It's the same thing that they noticed with Jace and the same thing they noticed with Lucerys. It's the fact that he looks nothing like Laenor. In fact, he looks more like the commander of the City Watch, Harwin, who's Lord Lionel's son. And after visiting with the king and the queen, she's able to take baby Joffrey, show his brothers what he looks like, and then show the real father. She gets a little bit of alone time with Harwin to admire their baby, as Laenor escorts both Jace and Lucerys down to dragon training. And the kids do dragon training with their cousins, Aegon, who's Viserys' oldest son, and Aemond, who's his youngest. But Aemond doesn't have his own dragon. He doesn't even have his own dragon egg. And it's something that he's really insecure about. So when Aegon and Jace and Lucerys all say, hey, we found you an egg, Aemond gets pretty excited until he finds out that it's literally just a pig that they taped wings to. He gets pretty upset by this and annoyed, and then he does something that he's been yelled at before to not do. He travels down to the dragon pit, where he sees the power of these beasts, and he gets pretty scared and caught. He gets escorted back up to go see the queen, where the queen is teaching her daughter Helaena all about bugs and whatnot. The queen starts reprimanding Aemond because she told him not to go in the dragon pit, and that's when he explains the whole pig thing. Alicent brings this to the king, and he doesn't really think it's that big of a deal. Boys will be boys kind of thing. She also puts most of the blame on Jace and Lucerys, but it's not so much them, it's their mother. And then she brings up the elephant in the room, that Rhaenyra just had her third child with Harwin. All three of them bastards. She feels like it's a slap in the face to the crown. Viserys, meanwhile, is acting like he has no idea what she's talking about because he wants to be completely oblivious to all of it. That actually pisses off Alicent even more. The person she confides in once she gets out of this meeting with the king is actually Criston Cole. He switched from watching Rhaenyra 10 years ago to watching Alicent. And it's as if the two are in a pissing contest of who hates Rhaenyra more as they walk around the kingdom on their high horse of morality. After bitching and moaning to Criston, she goes and talks to Aegon, who she catches in a very interesting situation. He was jerking off in a window over the city. But she approaches him about whose idea was it for the pig. He, just like his father, doesn't think it's that big of a deal. And she tells him it is a big deal. I know you find him annoying, but you have to stick up for your brother because Rhaenyra's children are not going to be your plaything forever. Right now, the way the crown goes, she's going to inherit it, which means that Jace is going to be next in line. Aegon, though, still isn't picking up on why this is a big deal, and Alicent yells, it's because once she takes over the throne, she's going to get rid of everybody that has a claim to it, which means you and your brother, because deep down everybody knows that you should be the heir to the throne. All of a sudden, Alicent sounds a lot like Otto. The next day, the kids get together and they do some training with a sword. They're taught by Criston Cole. This is all observed by the king and his hand. And as they're watching training and watching the kids, somebody else shows up to training. It's Lord Harwin. He starts kind of criticizing Criston's methods on how he's training the kids because he feels like they're not being fair. So Criston decides to train a little bit differently. He matches up Aegon and Jace, even though there's a huge size discrepancy. And what ends up happening is Criston ends up coaching up Aegon while Harwin ends up coaching up Jace. It gets really contentious to the point where Criston says, you know, your investment in this is kind of weird. It's the investment you'd only see for like a cousin or a brother or a son. And when he says that, Harwin starts beating the ever-loving crap out of him in front of everybody, all but confirming everybody's previous suspicions that Harwin is their dad. It doesn't take long for the news about the fight to break out throughout the castle, and when Rhaenyra finds out, she goes to talk to Harwin about it, but she overhears a conversation between Harmon and Lord Lionel, where Lord Lionel is screaming at Harwin that he's really risking his life with this relationship. But it's not just that he's risking his life, he's risking Lord Lionel's life, and more importantly, he's ruining any honor that they had. So Rhaenyra decides to let sleeping dogs lie, and she never talks to Harwin at all, just going back to her room, where she sits and waits for her husband. Eventually, Lord Laenor does show up, drunk, with his new lover, and when she gets Laenor alone, she can't even talk to him because he blurts out that he's heard there's a war raging on in the Stepstones. The Triarchy has formed an alliance with Dorne, and he can't wait to get back in a battle. And Rhaenyra brings up the fact that they have a battle raging at home that he has to be there for, because these rumors are becoming louder and louder. The thing is, Laenor doesn't really care. He feels like it's the worst kept secret in the realm. And this was their agreement. They would get married, but they'd be able to do their own thing. They go back and forth for a little bit until eventually she demands, as the heir to the throne, that he stay by her side in King's Landing. The next day, Rhaenyra heads to council, where it turns into a giant pissing contest between her and the queen. Everything that's brought up, they differ on. When the Stepstones are brought up, Rhaenyra blames the crown for not fortifying it after Daemon's victory a decade ago. Alicent points out that the crown doesn't have that money, fortifying it's pretty expensive, and Rhaenyra says, yeah, so are wars. Actually, wars are more expensive. Alicent tries to wrap up council, but Rhaenyra says, no, I have something to say. You know, our families, well, there's a rift there. It's been forming for a while. But before we were one house, we were actually friends. Rhaenyra then proposes a marriage between her oldest, the future heir to the crown, Jace, and Helaena, joining the two families once again. She also promises that if her dragons have more eggs, she will give them over to Alicent and her side. That way, Aemon will have his own egg. The king thinks this is a great idea. He's over the moon about the thought. But Alicent doesn't agree, and she gives Rhaenyra, yeah, we'll talk and think about it. And while the king is a little blind to it, Alicent points out she is drowning right now. She's backed up with these rumors, and she feels like if she offers this up, it'll all be swept under the rug. Even after the king points out this is a good deal for them and a good marriage and good match, Alicent says to him, yeah, you can do it when I'm dead. She then escorts the king into his room and he's going to rest, but they get interrupted by Lord Lionel. After what happened with his son, he feels like he can no longer be the hand of the king and he tries to resign. But he's really pussyfooting around the real issue. He's not going to come right out in front of the king and the queen and say, yeah, I'm resigning because my son just had his third child with your daughter who's actually married. So he really just has to hide behind the fight, which Harwin was already reprimanded for. He was fired from the City Watch. And to the king, that's punishment enough. So the king rejects Lionel's resignation. He does ask the king to allow him to escort Harwin to Harrenhal, the family castle. Harwin was to take it over long ago, and now it's time. And the king says, yeah, go ahead, do what you got to do. But Alicent is so annoyed at her husband for continuing to dig his head into the sand that she just walks out. She decides to go and have dinner with Harwin's brother, Lord Larys. And Larys has heard about the fact that his father had a meeting with the king, and that's when Alicent fills him in on everything they talked about. Suddenly, Alicent is beating herself up over the fact that 10 years ago, she didn't speak up on Otto's behalf, and it led to him getting fired. She says aloud, I have nobody in King's Landing by my side. So Larys decides to prove his loyalty to her. After meeting with the queen, he goes down to the prison, grabs 3 people, pardons them, cuts out their tongues so they can't say a word, and instructs them to go to Harrenhal, wait for his brother to arrive, which will probably be the next day, and kill him. But not just kill Harwin, kill Lionel as well. And sure enough, the next day, Harwin says his goodbye to his bastard family, saying that he'll see them again, but it just won't be for a while, and taking off to Harrenhal, where Larys' minions set fire to the castle and everybody pretty much dies. When the queen finds out, though, she's not happy at all. In fact, she's mortified. She tells Larys, this isn't what I asked for. And he tells her, I'm pretty sure you'll pay me back one day, when the time is right, all while having this smirk on his face. But Harwin isn't the only person that's leaving King's Landing. So is Rhaenyra. She goes up to Laenor and says, yeah, we're out of here. We probably should have left a while ago. We'll go to Dragonstone. The relationship I offered between Jace and Helaena, that's not going to be approved, and I'm sick of the rumors here. So the couple heads off. She even allows Laenor to bring his latest lover. And then finally an update on Daemon. He has married Laena Velaryon, and they have 2 daughters, Baela and Rhaena, although Laena's actually pregnant with their third. They've been laying pretty low. Their latest journey has them in Pentos, where they've been greeted by the prince, and he has an interesting offer for Daemon. He wants him to live there. They're going to pay him handsomely to do so, and the reason why he wants him to live there is because he wants to protect Pentos. He's heard about this latest alliance between the Triarchy and Dorne, and he doesn't want Pentos being taken over. With Daemon having dragons, that will never happen. Laena has no interest in living in Pentos, but Daemon actually decides to consider the idea. Later that night, when they're alone, she tells Daemon, I don't want my child being born in Pentos. I don't want my daughters to be raised in Pentos. But Daemon doesn't really even listen. The next day, she tries to make a pitch again to Daemon about leaving. She tells him that she's heard from her brother that he and Rhaenyra have had their third child, which even they know about the rumors between Rhaenyra and Harwin. They actually joke about it. But she tells Daemon, I miss my brother, and I'm sure that you miss King's Landing. We should go. But Daemon tells her, no, I don't really miss King's Landing. Daemon's simply content. A day later, she goes into labor with the third child, but it's excruciating. It gets to the point where the doctors have to cut her open to save the baby. She overhears the doctor telling Daemon this, and before Daemon can all but sentence her to death, she decides to take matters into her own hands. She waddles outside and commands her dragon to set fire to her, killing her and the baby before Daemon can even do a thing. And now Daemon is left a widower with 2 daughters to take care of. In episode 7, everybody heads to Driftmark for the funeral of Laena. And I mean everybody, including the king's new hand, Otto Hightower. And everybody's really disappointed about the death of Laena, but Laenor is taking it by far the hardest. I mean, he is inconsolable, to the point where during the wake, everybody's kind of milling about, talking, and Laenor is just standing in the ocean by himself, unresponsive. It's his boyfriend who has to go get him and make sure that he comes back. During the wake, Viserys goes over to his brother, Daemon, to see how he's doing. and Daemon's fine, adding in a few shots to the king. But the king misses his brother, and he offers him a seat on his council back in King's Landing. But Daemon tells him that he has no interest in going back to King's Landing. He doesn't miss home. He tells him his home is on Pentos, and he needs nothing from him. He then walks off. But this conversation is being closely watched by Rhaenyra, who, even though it's been a decade plus, still has that forbidden fruit on her mind. So she goes and chases after him. She's eventually able to catch up to him, and she tells him that everybody knows the relationship with her and Laenor is a farce, but she tried to keep up appearances. And they even tried to consummate the marriage and actually have children of their own, but it just wasn't enjoyable for them, so they couldn't do it. They then went around and found pleasures elsewhere. That's when Harwin came along. The death of Harwin sparks Daemon to put a lot of the blame on Alicent and Otto. He thinks they had something to do with it, but Rhaenyra tells him, I don't think Alicent's capable of murder. And somehow this conversation segues into their own relationship, with Rhaenyra blaming Daemon for leaving her, and leaving her in this life that she never really wanted. Daemon firing back that his life isn't exactly perfect either. But all this sexual tension building up, it's got to go somewhere. So she leans in, tells Daemon, I'm not a child anymore, and they start hooking up. That hookup leads to the bedroom. And probably the most unbelievable thing about this show is the fact that a woman who just had a baby not too long ago has sex with a guy and seems to enjoy it quite a bit. But back in the castle, once Rhaena and Corlys get alone, they start arguing when Corlys brings up the fact that Rhaena should have been the king. And she snaps at her husband, get over it. I got over it 20 plus years ago, but you still harp on it. And it's not because you want me to be queen. It's because of your own ambitions, your lust for the throne. He doesn't deny it, bringing up legacy. And if he's going to talk about legacy, then she brings up Laena. She tells Corlys that she wants Driftmark to pass through Laena's kids, not Laenor's. And he doesn't want to insult Laenor's children, but she tells him the cold hard truth, that his blood is not in those kids, because those kids are not Laenor's kids. But Laena's kids, they do belong to him. So do right by him. Because the reality is Laenor's children are going to end up on the throne one day. They'll be fine. But Driftmark should stay with Laena's kids. Corlys, however, does not agree. He tells his wife that history does not remember blood, it remembers names, and then he gets up and storms off. But the girls that they were just talking about, Baela and Rhaena, notice something in the middle of the night. It's that their mother's dragon, Vhagar, is gone. They feel like somebody must have stolen them. They wake up Rhaenyra's children, and they start looking around for the dragon. And when it finally lands, they're very surprised because Aemond was the one riding it. He looked all over the island for the dragon, and once he found it, he hopped on board and started riding all over the place, and the dragon had no problem with it. So once he hops off the dragon, he tells both girls, that dragon's mine now. And they take great offense to it. They remind him that that dragon belonged to their mother, and thus it should belong to them. But he tells them that their mother's dead, and maybe they should have claimed it. This sparks a pretty big fight, and every kid has a little bit of blame in it, but Aemon probably has the most. He goes off, he punches Baela in the face, he's throwing kids around, and at one point, it looks like he's about to impale Lucerys' head in with a rock until Jace pulls out a knife. Aemon starts mocking both the boys about the fact that their father is dead. And while Jace had some idea about this, he even approached his mother regarding it, Lucerys is completely unaware. So when Aemon goes off and calls both kids a bastard, Jace pulls that knife out and slices Aemon's face up, cutting his eye really good to the point where he's never going to have an eye again. This brawl, ending in blood, causes a midnight meeting between the family, where the king is outraged. So is the queen. She puts all of the blame on Rhaenyra's children, but the king just wants to get to the bottom of how all this transpired. And that's when Rhaenyra says, well, Aemon decided to say some pretty interesting rumors. Rumors that normally would get somebody killed. But since he's your son, I'm not going to demand that. So how about you find out where he heard it from? That's right, Rhaenyra is still playing like these kids are indeed Laenor's children. But the king does like this idea, so he asks Aemon, who at first doesn't say anything, but his eyes shoot over to Alicent. Although when it comes time to actually answer the question on where he heard these rumors, he says Aegon. So the king goes and questions Aegon, who is hung over at the time. And Aegon doesn't betray his mother either, just saying, come on, look at them. Everybody knows it. They look nothing like Laenor. This is the worst kept secret in the realm. The king doesn't really know what to do with that comment, so he just yells that this infighting has to stop because they're a family. They need to apologize and move on. But moving on is not something that Alicent is willing to do. She demands that if her son had an eye taken from him, then an eye should be reclaimed. And she even goes so far as to command Sir Criston to go and take Lucerys' eye. And that is something that even Criston is not willing to do. The king walks over to her and says, this matter is over, but to her, it's not. And when the king turns to walk away, she grabs Aegon the Conqueror's dagger and makes a beeline over to Lucerys. She's stopped by Rhaenyra, who is holding her back, and the two women get into a verbal argument. Alicent being extremely bitter because, as she puts it to Rhaenyra, I did my duty. I respected the crown. I did everything that I was supposed to. And you, well, you just ran around disrespecting the crown, doing whatever it is you please. And Rhaenyra tells her, it must have been exhausting hiding behind the cloak of your own righteousness. But now they see you as you are. And that's when Alicent slices Rhaenyra's arm open. At that moment, everybody's kind of frozen because Alicent just attacked the princess and the heir to the throne. But it's Aemond who breaks the silence by telling his mother, don't worry about it. I lost an eye, but I gained a dragon, and I would do that every day of the week. And that kind of puts an end to the squabble. But the next day, Alicent still doesn't like how she handled any of it. She feels like she lost her temper. But Otto loved how she handled it. And he meets with her in the morning and tells her as much. He says, we play a dangerous game, and it wasn't until last night that I thought you could actually win it. So go back to the king, apologize, he'll forgive you, control your feelings, and in time, both of us will prevail together. So that's exactly what she does. As they head off to King's Landing, she apologizes to the king, but she's still seething and bitter. And on the boat ride back, Larys walks up to her. Having witnessed everything that weekend, he asked the queen, if it's an eye that you want, I can get it for you. But she tells him it's not necessary. Although it's at this moment that she's realizing having a guy on your side who is this loyal, who is willing to kill and take kids' eyes, that can be a good thing. So she tells Larys that his loyalty will not be forgotten. But one day, she will need his skill set and his discretion. But back in the castle, as Rhaenyra is getting tended to, Laenor finally shows up from wherever it is he was. And he feels terrible that he wasn't there to protect her, protect the kids. He tells Rhaenyra that his boyfriend is going off to battle. And once he does, he is going to devote himself to the promise that he made her, keeping up with this farce. The fact that this rumor has gotten out of hand, he really blames himself for it. He vows to make this lie more believable. But after this discussion with her husband, she goes and meets with the guy that she probably wants to be her husband, Daemon Targaryen. She tells him that she cannot do this alone. And she all but begs him to marry her, uniting their blood, just like Aegon the Conqueror did back in the day. She also tells him that with Daemon as her husband, her claim to the throne won't be so easily challenged. But they can't get married with Laenor still alive. They have to do something about that. So they come up with a plan. Daemon goes off and kills some unsuspecting person. And then they stage a fight between Laenor and his boyfriend. That's pretty public. They start battling it out, and the person who's witnessing it goes off to grab the Kingsguard to break it up. But once the Kingsguard shows back up, it's the boyfriend who is standing there in front of a charred up body that was thrown into the fire. Corlys and Rhaena are distraught because they've just lost their second and last child in a matter of days. But that body is completely unrecognizable. And this ruse allows Laenor and his boyfriend to escape and live the life that they want. This also allows Rhaenyra and Daemon to finally get married. In episode 8, we have yet another time jump. This one, roughly 5 to 6 years after the marriage of Daemon and Rhaenyra. Since then, a couple of people aren't doing so hot. The first one is the king. He's basically on his deathbed, which is leaving Alicent and Otto to kind of man the realm. The other person that's not doing well is the Sea Serpent, Lord Corlys. He went off to war in the Stepstones with the Triarchy. He got stabbed. He's got a bad fever, and he's likely not going to survive it. Because of this, his brother went to Rhaenys, and he wants Driftmark for himself. In the order of succession, Driftmark is likely going to pass to Rhaenyra's child, Lucerys. But the way that Vaemond looks at it, there's no way that that kid was actually Laenor's child. So there's going to be a claim put in on Vaemond's behalf. Now over on Dragonstone, Daemon's in high spirits because he found new dragon eggs, but then he gets news from Baela. Baela had stayed back with Rhaenys, so she heard the whole conversation with Vaemond and his claim that he's the rightful heir to Driftmark. Baela decided to warn her father, and this really pisses off Rhaenyra. It forces Rhaenyra and Daemon, along with the children, to travel to King's Landing for the first time in years. When they arrive, the kids go off and check out the training grounds. They haven't been there since they were young children. And it's just as they left it. But at the training ground is Aemond. He's gotten bigger, and he's gotten much better at fighting. But Daemon and Rhaenyra headed straight to the king's chambers, where he is doing horribly. He's missing an eye, he looks like a damn skeleton, he's incoherent at times, but he's still the king. So they fill the king in on exactly why they're there and these allegations against Lucerys. They want the king to step in on Lucerys' behalf. He explains that Otto and Alicent handle all that business now, but they say, no, you need to stick up for your grandson. He's the rightful heir to Driftmark. They then introduce him to his newest grandsons, Aegon and baby Viserys. And the fact they name one of their children after him really touches his weak, dying heart. Now, while Daemon and Rhaenyra were with the king, they weren't greeted by Lady Alicent, but it's not out of spite. She was dealing with an issue. Her son, Aegon, had raped a girl, and the girl is crying because she feels like no one's going to believe her story. So she's pretty relieved when Alicent actually does believe the story. But Alicent's not really going to do anything about it. She explains to the girl, while I believe your story, some people won't. You were here with the prince alone. They're going to think what kind of girl you are, so let's keep this quiet. And then Alicent pays the girl off. She then goes and reprimands Aegon, but Aegon doesn't really think it's that big of a deal. And it leads Alicent to say, you are no son of mine. I guess Aegon hasn't been really all that faithful of a husband to his wife, who happens to also be his sister. She then goes and sees Rhaenyra and Daemon. And this is the first time that she has seen both of them since she cut the princess a couple of years ago. They're cordial at first, but it doesn't take long for a fight to break out. It has to do with the treatment of the king. Rhaenyra and Daemon feel like he's been doped up so that Alicent and Otto can rule. And Alicent defends her actions by saying, well, if we don't dope him up, he's going to be in extreme pain and there's really going to be no reason for him to live. They then get into the matter of why they're actually there, this claim to Driftmark, and they find out that Alicent is going to decide who actually gets Driftmark. She tells them that she's going to be unbiased, but they don't believe that that's going to be the case. A little while later, their competition for Driftmark shows up at King's Landing. Vaemond arrives, but so does Rhaenys. And with Rhaenys all alone, Rhaenyra, along with Rhaena, Rhaenys' granddaughter, go and see her. Rhaenys hasn't seen her granddaughter in quite some time, but after saying hello, Rhaenyra asks to speak to Rhaenys alone. Rhaenyra tries to get Rhaenys on her side, even going so far as to offer up her children to wed Rhaenys' granddaughters, which would be Baela and Rhaena. And even though that's a great offer, Rhaenys is not going to join Rhaenyra's claim on this, mainly because she thinks that she had something to do with her son's death. And Rhaenyra swears that she had nothing to do with Laenor's death, but Rhaenys just doesn't believe her. At this point, Rhaenyra is pretty desperate for an ally. She makes one last plea to the king, going to his chambers that night and starting off the conversation by asking him, do you believe in the story of the Song of Ice and Fire? He doesn't answer the question, just acknowledging that he knows what the question meant. She then tells him that when he named her heir to the throne, he said he needed to unite the realm against a common foe. But when she was named heir, it divided the realm. And she thought that she wanted to be queen, but the burden is a lot. She grabs his hand and says, if you want me to bear this burden, then you have to defend me and my children. Defend this claim against Driftmark. But the king doesn't answer. And the next day is the deciding vote, where both parties get to make their claim. Before this happens, Otto Hightower goes to check on the king, who is being tended to by the maesters. and the king tells him, I want to have a dinner with everybody tonight. Otto tells the king that he'll set it up, and then he goes to hear these claims, being so bold as to actually sit on the Iron Throne even though he is not the king. Vaemond makes his pitch, and then Rhaenyra gets up to make hers, but the door opens up, and it's the king, hobbling in, ready to take back the throne, kicking off Otto, and finally sitting down after the longest walk possible. He decides to have Rhaenys give some insight. After all, she would have known what the sea serpent wanted. And Rhaenys is honest, saying that Lord Corlys always wanted Driftmark to go to Luke. But then Rhaenys also brings up Rhaenyra's proposal, her children to marry Baela and Rhaena. And the king loves that idea. As far as he's concerned, this matter is settled. Driftmark will go to Lucerys. And that does not sit well with Vaemond, and he can't hold his tongue. He starts ripping the king, starts ripping him for his decision-making, and then he really steps up his game by calling the kids bastards and calling Rhaenyra a whore. The king tells Vaemond, I'll have your tongue for that, but too late, because Daemon pulls out a sword and chops Vaemond's head off. Rhaenys goes and deals with the body, because she's got to bring that back to Driftmark. But everybody else, they go and have dinner. A dinner that's forced upon them that nobody really wants to be at. The king stands up and makes a speech, saying that everybody in the room are the people he really cares about. But what makes him sad is the fact that all these people have gotten so distant. He tells them that he is dying. He's not going to live much longer, and life is too short to hold grudges. And this speech really hits home with Rhaenyra. So she steps up and gives a toast to Alicent, saying that while they had their differences, Alicent has been extremely loyal and a great wife to the king. And for that, she's really grateful. And Alicent is touched by these remarks. The two women who were enemies are finally able to build a bridge and get over their issues. Alicent even goes so far as to tell Rhaenyra, you'll be a great queen. But this isn't the only speech, because throughout the dinner, Aegon has really been razzing Jace. Jace is going to marry Baela, and Aegon has been making fun of him for being a virgin, asking if he knows how to have sex. But when Aegon walks over to Baela and tells her, if you ever want to be with a real man, just let me know, that infuriates Jace. So he steps up, but he doesn't retaliate. Instead, raising a glass to both Aegon and Aemon and saying that they used to be close, and he hopes that they can be close again. After that, the party kicks off, and everybody seems like they're having a pretty good time, but the king's health deteriorates pretty quickly, and he has to leave the room. And when that happens, all hell breaks loose. Because shortly after the king leaves, the food arrives. And they just so happen to put a burnt pig right in front of Aemon. And he's still really sensitive to the whole pig thing. And Luke can't help but laugh at the irony. This infuriates Aemon. He slams the table and says, "No, I have another toast. It's to my nephews, Lucerys, Jace, and Joffrey. They are handsome, they are wise, and they are strong." And strong would have been their name had their mother not run with this lie that they were actually Laenor's children. So when he keeps repeating that they are strong, everybody in the room knows what it means. And it really pisses off Jace. He ends up punching Aemon in the face, and it causes a little bit of a fight. And Alicent actually gets in the middle of it and yells at Aemon. But Aemon pretends that he didn't know what he was doing, saying, "What? I'm giving them a compliment. I'm telling them that they're strong." It really puts a damper on the party, and the kids are sent off to bed. Rhaenyra walks up to Alicent and tells her that she's going to head back to Dragonstone, get the kids settled, but once they are, she'll head back to King's Landing and be with her father. And everything that happened in this wild night ends up making their way back to Mysaria, who is still in King's Landing and has eyes and ears in the castle, so she knows everything that went down. But late that night, Alicent goes to check on her husband. And as I said, he's a little bit delirious. The king doesn't realize that he's talking to Alicent. He thinks he's talking to Rhaenyra. So he starts answering her question that she asked earlier about the Song of Ice and Fire. He tells her it's true. The Song of Ice and Fire, the prince that was promised, it's all true. Now, Alicent has absolutely no idea what he's talking about, but he continues. And he says, "You're the one. You must do this." So Alicent thinks that he's talking about her, when in reality, he's talking about his daughter, Rhaenyra. Alicent gets up and leaves the room, and he takes his final breath. Maybe. I don't know. I thought this guy's died like 15 times throughout the show, so who knows? We'll see you next week. And in episode 8, you finally find out that he actually did die. It finally happened. Yep. Word gets to the queen, and Alicent wants to keep it a secret as long as she possibly can. He tells those that are close to her, like Otto. But that last conversation that she had with Viserys, somehow she interpreted it as she's supposed to make Aegon the king. It was his, quote, dying wish. And it seems like she actually believes that. They then hold an emergency meeting of the King's Council. And it turns out most of the council was already planning on this happening anyway. If the king were to die, they were going to enact a plan where Aegon was to take over, not Rhaenyra. And when Alicent finds out about this, she's pretty pissed off, especially because it seems like it was Otto's doing. Another person who isn't happy is Lord Lyman. He's more pissed off about the fact that they're just acting like Rhaenyra wasn't promised the throne. He also finds it very fishy that the king, quote, changed his mind in front of Alicent, and only Alicent. And he starts putting up a fight about this, but he ends up getting killed by Sir Criston. Sir Harold tries to fire him on the spot. After all, Sir Harold is in charge of the King's Guard, but the Queen tells everybody to just put their swords away and calm down. They then start talking about what they're going to do about Rhaenyra, and Otto says we have to get rid of her. We can't have somebody out there with a claim to the throne. And Alicent doesn't want this at all. She wants to give Rhaenyra a chance to bend the knee. She, however, doesn't give this order. And when Otto tells Sir Harold to go take dragons and be quick, Sir Harold throws his stuff down, saying, I take orders from the king, and only the king. And until there is a king, I'm not taking orders from anybody. The meeting then disperses, and a few people start looking for Aegon. The queen and Otto Hightower. The thing is, Aegon is nowhere to be found. He's not in the castle, and somehow he snuck out into the city. Otto finds 2 knights named Eric and Eric. They're twin brothers. And he instructs them to go into the city, find Aegon, and bring him back only to Otto Hightower, not even the queen. Sir Criston finds out about this, and he lets the queen know. So the queen, in turn, ends up sending Criston and Aemond into the city. So you've got these 2 groups that are looking for Aegon, and it's really a race against time. While these 2 groups go to work, Otto brings everybody together who bent the knee 20 years ago in Oath of Rhaenyra, and he tells them the new plan, that Aegon is to take over and they're supposed to bend the knee to Aegon. Just about everybody does. There's only a few people that stand up and don't bend the knee, and there's only a few of those who end up putting up a vocal fight about this. Those people end up getting killed. And the one guy who hadn't bent the knee yet and also hadn't said a word ends up finally bending the knee. But at the first chance he gets, he also tries to flee the city and probably tell Rhaenyra, and he ends up getting caught by Lord Larys. He ends up ratting him out to Otto, and that poor guy ends up getting killed as well. Otto mentions to Larys that he's noticed that Larys and the Queen have been spending a lot of time together. And Larys tells him, well, there's no reason why what we discuss can't help you too. Larys, being the ultimate snake, is trying to double dip and play both ends to his advantage. So Otto and Larys have a private conversation. The Queen, meanwhile, was tending to her husband's remains and also tending to his sister. Rhaenys hasn't been let out of her room. She's been locked up. And when the Queen finally goes and addresses her, Rhaenys is pretty pissed off about this. But the Queen explains that the king is dead and his last dying wish was to have Aegon take the throne over. She's come to Rhaenys that day to really curry favor. She wants Rhaenys on her side. She makes her pitch to Rhaenys and even offers her Driftmark. She also admits to Rhaenys that Rhaenys should have been queen years ago. It shouldn't have been Viserys, but unfortunately, that's the way it went. And Rhaenys looks at Alicent and says, come on, not even a little part of you wants to be queen? You don't want to take up the Iron Throne? And Alicent is kind of speechless at this. She doesn't know what to say, and she just tells Rhaenys, when you have an answer for me, ring the bell. And then she leaves, locking Rhaenys back up in her room. Now, in the city, both groups were hard at work trying to find Aegon. Eric and Eric ended up going to a child fight club, where it turns out Aegon spends a lot of time there. And maybe it's because he has a vested interest. They look over in a corner, and one of Aegon's bastard sons is just chilling. But at this child fight club, they're approached by somebody who wants to talk to the Hand of the King. Her name is the White Worm, and she reassures both twin brothers that she knows where Aegon is. So they send word to Otto, and a little while later, he ventures into the city and he meets with the White Worm. And it turns out it's Mysaria. As Mysaria and Otto are talking, the whole conversation, though, is being watched from a distance by Aemon and Criston. They figure if they just follow this group, they'll find Aegon. Sure enough, it works, because Mysaria tells Otto that she wants the child fight clubs to stop. The Gold Cloaks have turned an eye to it for years, and it's got to come to an end. And he reassures her that he'll look into it, and that's when she gives a location of Aegon. Twin brothers go and find him, and he's drunk and has zero interest in taking over the throne. But when they drag him out of the temple that he was in, there's Criston and Aemon waiting to intercept. Eric and Criston get into a sword fight, and when Aegon takes off running, Aemond jumps on him. In the end, the team of Criston and Aemon end up winning out, taking control of Aegon and taking him back to the queen. But this isn't before Aegon made a real pitch to his brother to just let him go, get on a boat, and leave. Never to be seen again. He really, really doesn't want to be king. And Aemon really, really does. So he definitely entertains the idea. But ultimately, they bring Aegon back to the queen. Now with Aegon firmly in her custody, Alicent goes and talks to Otto because she's not happy. Otto tries to explain to her that they're fighting the same battle. They're on the same side, but she says, no, we're not. I finally see that now. I'm a pawn in your little game that you've always been moving. They then start fighting about the fact that Otto wants to kill Rhaenyra, and that's not Alicent's wish at all. And with Aegon in her custody, she now calls the shots. So she tells her father, here's how this is going to play out. We're going to send terms to Rhaenyra on Dragonstone and wait for her response. Criston will be sworn in as commander of the King's Guard, and the next day at dawn, Aegon will be sworn in as the new king, and all of King's Landing will be there to witness it. She walks out of this meeting with her father and goes to her room, but she's not alone. Lord Larys was there waiting for her. Turns out, Lord Larys has some information for her, but he also has a foot fetish, which is ironic because the guy has a club foot. But we don't kink shame on this YouTube channel. In order to give this information, though, he makes Alicent show him her feet. And the information he has is the fact that there's a spy ring in her castle. In fact, one of the spies is her lady-in-waiting, named Talia. The thing is, Otto knew about this. He kept the spy ring in line because he figured it could benefit him at times, and it has. As long as this spy ring is still there, Alicent's secrets are never going to be secrets. So the best way to handle this is take out the head of the snake. Figure that that's probably the white worm. Alicent gives the okay to Larys to get it done, and then she pulls out her feet and lets him touch himself to her Edgar Allan toes. After he finishes, he does seem to make good on his promise because the next day there's a fire that he probably had something to do with. But the next day is also the day where Aegon is to be sworn in. And Rhaenys has yet to give an answer to Alicent, and she's still locked up. But not for long, because when Eric finds out that Rhaenys is locked up, he finds it treasonous, and he wants to sneak her out of the city. The thing is, all she's focused on is getting back to her dragon, but Eric explains there's no time to go to the dragon pit. We've got to get you to shore, get you on a boat, and get you out of here. Unfortunately, they get swept up in the crowd that is going back to the kingdom to watch Aegon be sworn in as the new king. And they have no choice. They've got to follow the crowd. So in front of all of King's Landing, a very bitter Aegon is sworn in. Although when he gets the crown on his head and he gets the sword and he feels the power, he starts to come around to the idea. But Rhaenys decided to use this distraction to her advantage and sneak down to the dragon pit. And shortly after Aegon is sworn in, Rhaenys and her dragon burst through the floor, sending terror throughout most of the people there. And this includes Alicent, Aegon, everybody else who was involved in the ceremony, but they're frozen still. Rhaenys, sitting on her dragon staring at them, they figure that they're about to die. But instead of yelling Dracarys, the dragon just screams at them, sending the fear of God into them, and then Rhaenys turns around and flies away. And in the season finale, Rhaenyra is just hanging out on Dragonstone. She's having a conversation with Lucerys about his duty and what he's supposed to do. He doesn't really have any interest in being Lord of the Tides, but thus, that's what he's going to be. That's when she gets word that Rhaenys has shown up. Gets both Rhaenyra and Daemon in a room together and tells them of what happened at King's Landing. The fact that her father's dead, and the fact that there's a usurper. Right away, Daemon figures that it was Alicent who killed his brother and took the crown for her son. He then gets really pissed off at Rhaenys when she tells him how she escaped, because he says, you could have burned all of them and you didn't. And Rhaenys tells him, look, there's a war coming, but that's not my war to start. Now, they're coming for you, Rhaenyra. You really should leave Dragonstone immediately. But there's an issue. She goes into labor super, super early, so she can't leave. As she is dealing with premature labor, Daemon gets everybody in a room together and starts going over strategy on how not to die. The reality is they don't have as many men to surround the entire island, but he figures that they can trick them into thinking that they're stronger than they are. They also have these things called dragons. They have a lot of them, so that's a positive. Daemon then gets word that the sea snake's fever is broken. The guy that was once thought to be on death's door is quickly on the road to recovery, although they have no idea where he's sailing or what state of mind he's in. Daemon then gives the order to send ravens to their closest allies, and he himself is planning on flying to one of them, but Jace walks in and tells him, no, you're not. Her mom has given the order that nobody leaves this place while she's in bed. Daemon then heads out and talks to two King's guards, trying to figure out their loyalty as his wife continues to go through labor. And in one gnarly scene, Rhaenyra, refusing help of any of the nurses, just rips the baby out of her, and the baby is stillborn. She then prepares the baby's funeral, and they go outside and honor the baby. As they're doing so, Eric, the knight that was tasked to go into the city and find Prince Aegon, shows up on Dragonstone. In all of the madness and confusion, he stole the crown and headed out. He has loyalty to Rhaenyra because he feels like she is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. So he shows up, bends the knee, and swears his loyalty to her, presenting her with the crown that she can put on her head. As soon as she puts it on, everybody that's there bends the knee. Everybody except Rhaenys. They then walk back into the room where they can strategize, and Daemon introduces her as Queen Rhaenyra. Daemon then starts quickly giving her an update on their strategy. Everybody around the table starts figuring who they can count on and who they can't. There's one particular guy named Lord Grover that Daemon's planning on flying and meeting with. And while this is the first time Rhaenyra's hearing about it, her face doesn't seem too thrilled with the idea. Rhaenys then gives the update on her husband. She's been alerted that he is sailing to Dragonstone, but they have no idea if he's going to bend the knee or not. They then continue to give her updates on who they can count on, who they can't. And that's when one of the guys pipes up and says, we have dragons. We have a lot of them. But Rhaenyra points out that none of their dragons have actually been to war. And everything she's heard, when dragons go to war against each other, everything turns to ash. It's not something she wants to see happen. But Daemon agrees that they do have a powerful asset in these dragons. They not only have more of them, they can get more. They have the dragon eggs, and they know where some unclaimed dragons are. Eric then runs in the room and alerts them that Otto Hightower and the group from King's Landing have arrived. They don't meet with Rhaenyra right away. They actually meet with Daemon on the same bridge that a teenage Rhaenyra met with Daemon years ago to look for his surrender. Well, Otto's here to do that. Get their surrender. Rhaenyra, in probably a move to intimidate them, flies in on a dragon and hears Otto Hightower's terms. At the behest of Alicent, he doesn't kill her. He does offer her a chance to live and bend the knee to King Aegon. Of course, Rhaenyra and Daemon take this as a slap in the face. They have no interest in bending the knee to a usurper. Otto tries to explain that he's not a usurper. He was sworn in front of everybody, and everybody at this point just believes that he is the king, so he's the king. He sits on the Iron Throne. And the promises that were made to Rhaenyra were before Aegon was born. Rhaenyra gets so annoyed that she walks up to Otto, snatching the pin off his lapel and throwing it, saying, "You are no more the hand than Aegon is king. You're a traitor." In a last-ditch effort, Otto hands Rhaenyra a ripped-out page from a book that her and Alicent used to read when they were kids, trying to remind her that Alicent has no interest in being enemies with her. She wants to be friends. Otto then says that the queen eagerly awaits Rhaenyra's answer, and Daemon jumps in and says, well, she could have her answer now. And he pulls out a sword and he's ready to do battle. But it's Rhaenyra who shuts it down, telling Otto that she'll give King's Landing her answer tomorrow. Rhaenyra, Daemon, and her group then walk back into the castle and start going over strategy once again. Daemon hammering home that they have more dragons, they're more powerful. Rhaenyra hammering home that she doesn't want to go to war with dragons because she doesn't want to rule a kingdom of ash. Daemon gets so frustrated with Rhaenyra and her calm response to all of this that he screams They've already declared war. What are you going to do about it? And Rhaenyra has to clear the room. She tells Daemon, you know that my oath reaches far beyond our ambitions. Daemon looks confused, so she says, the Song of Ice and Fire. The coming war against the North, the Conqueror's dream. But Daemon just grabs her by the throat and says, dreams didn't make us kings. Dragons did. And that's when Rhaenyra says out loud, oh my God, he never told you. And she's amused by this. The fact that she knew about the prince that was promised and he clearly didn't. As Daemon and Rhaenyra were having this conversation, the Sea Snake has arrived in Dragonstone. He's not back to 100%, but he's also no longer on death's door. The first thing he does is apologize to his wife for abandoning her. He didn't really know what to do when he lost both children, so he decided to go off to war. Not the best move as a husband. They then get into the whole matter of Jace being named the new Lord of the Tides, the new King Aegon, Rhaenyra, and who they're supposed to side with. But Corlys doesn't care. He's over it. He realizes now that his wife was right all along. He's perfectly content with taking his wife, taking his grandchildren, and just going off, living in Driftmark. But Rhaenys reminds him that Jace, Luke, and Joff are claimants of the throne, which means they're never going to be safe. Corlys then reminds his wife that Rhaenyra was complicit in their son's death. He screams that girl destroys everything that she touches. But Rhaenys says no, she doesn't. That girl is keeping the realm together. Everybody wants to go to war, and she's the only one with a level head. So that kind of makes up Corlys' mind. He gets up out of bed, and with Rhaenys, they walk in, and Corlys sees Rhaenyra for the first time. He apologizes to her about her father's death, and then he starts looking around for Daemon, and she has to tell him that Daemon's dealing with another matter at the moment. He then tells Rhaenyra that she has the full support of his fleet and his house, which is a big relief to Rhaenyra. Having the Valyrian fleet actually gives them a fighting chance. But to make it better, Corlys tells her that he was able to solidify the Stepstones. They run it now. The Triarchy is no more. And because of that, they can shut down the shipping lanes to King's Landing. And that is an absolute game changer. Rhaenys offers to take her dragon and patrol, making sure nobody ends up destroying their blockade. Now, the next step is making sure that they have allies to actually fight with them. They need to secure the support of Winterfell, the Eyrie, and Storm's End. So they're planning on sending ravens. But Jace says, no, you should send us. Dragons can fly faster than ravens, and they're way more convincing. Rhaenyra thinks about it and agrees. She sends Jace north to solidify Eyrie and then Winterfell, while she sends Lucerys south and meet with Lord Boros Baratheon. Right before the boys leave, though, she makes them swear that they will not be fighters. They are going as messengers, not soldiers. She wants her boys returning home. And they swear to it. They then take off. When Lucerys arrives in Storm's End, he's pretty nervous, but he's shocked because his dragon isn't the only one there. There's a much bigger one. And then he notices whose dragon it belongs to when he actually walks into the castle, and it's Aemon's. He's beaten Lucerys to it. Now, Lucerys is even more nervous than ever. But Baratheon demands to know why he showed up and what he's offering. And the thing is, Lucerys isn't offering a thing. The message from the queen is just, honor what your father promised. But Boros Baratheon couldn't care less about what his father said he would do. He's a different man. On top of it, Aemon is offering a pretty good package. So it's going to be a no from Storm's End. But Lucerys isn't able to just walk out the door. Aemon asks him, do you really think you're just going to walk in here and try to steal my brother's crown without having to pay for it? But Lucerys tells him, I'm not fighting you. I'm here as a messenger. That's it. But Aemon isn't about to just let him walk. He wants to take from Lucerys what Lucerys took from him, his eye. Luckily for Lucerys, Boros Baratheon ain't having it. He says, you can take this fight somewhere else. And Lucerys is quick to get the hell out of there, hop on his dragon, and fly away. Although, as he's trying to fly back to Dragonstone, he's being chased by Aemon and his much bigger dragon. He's able to evade Aemon, flying through some narrow caverns, but eventually, Lucerys' dragon acts on his own, spitting fire in the face of Aemon's dragon, even though Lucerys didn't order it. And just like Rhaenyra predicted, when dragons start going to war together, bad things happen. Aemon commands his dragon to not go after Lucerys' dragon, but it's too late. Lucerys flies up over the clouds thinking he's safe, and then out of nowhere, Aemon's dragon ends up biting him in half, and killing both of them. And Aemon is in shock because that wasn't part of the plan, and now he knows that a war is definitely going to kick off. And sure enough, when Rhaenyra gets the news from Daemon that Lucerys died, her entire mood changes, and her face is ready for revenge. And that is how the end of House of Dragon Season 1 ends. Thank you so much for getting this point of the recap. Consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. I have memberships. I have a Patreon. All of that is in my bio. Be nice in the comments section. If I messed up a name, it happens. But let me know what you thought of this season and what you're expecting for Season 2.